Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched This Is Where I Leave You from 2014. Now, I don't remember who recommended this to me or when. It's been on a list for some very long time, and it's a very long list, so who knows at this point. And after watching it, I couldn't even tell you off of that who it probably was. But this one has struck my curiosity just because, for all of the things that it is and isn't, it is more than one thing, and I think that's very interesting. In its original presentation, it seems to be a dramedy. I kind of hate that term. A comedy drama film, black comedy style, about a family reconvening for a funeral. That is not what the movie is really about. And as you watch the first chunk of the film, or as I watched the first chunk of the film, I'll say, I got the impression that, in fact, no, it's a romantic comedy in disguise, obfuscating its romantic comedy intentions. Not that well, but with the framework of these other things going on. Turns out it's not really that either. There is an interesting mix of elements in this movie that touch on a variety of different genres, all that were particularly popular in this era, the sort of mid 2010s, and manages to use some of the hallmarks and tropes of a lot of those films in ways that are just different enough to make them interesting. Now, it does suffer from quite a number of the pitfalls as well. I will put that forward first and foremost. It has some pretty lowbrow comedy moments. It has some moments that are just entirely unnecessary and are there for a forced laugh that doesn't work. But it also has some surprisingly nuanced comedy and some surprisingly insightful views into both familial relationships, friendships, and romantic relationships. And while I would hesitate to say that it's not a romantic comedy, that is not its primary draw, or at least not its sole draw. This is not a romantic comedy in disguise. It is a whole bunch of different things, ultimately. And what's really doing most of the heavy lifting on that front is the script. The script is, aside from the aforementioned sort of pitfalls that I'm going to chalk up to being down to executive producer rewrites, or, script rewrites in some late stage to quote unquote punch it up for the era. The core of the script and the most impactful scenes are actually very well written. It has a surprising amount of subtlety where it needs to, not expositing very much at all, letting you understand the relationships between the characters directly from their interactions with each other's rather than with each other, rather than telling you what's going on with them individually. It lets you wonder for long enough about various things in order to, pique your curiosity and then satisfy it. And when it hits on some heavy and difficult topics, it doesn't do so in such a way that it is going to be an all-time favorite of mine by any means for its nuanced viewpoint of this, that, or the other topic, but certainly adds an amount of seriousness and importance to a narrative that is otherwise primarily about comedic familial dysfunction and relationship dysfunction. I could compare this to a whole bunch of different movies, but the one I'm going to choose to is just to sort of make fun for a minute and say, if you know somebody, or you are somebody who thinks that Love Actually is a really good like romantic comedy film and really likes that, watch this instead. Because I'm not going to say that Love Actually is without any value or any qualities, but every case of Love Actually where it is extremely saccharine and feels like everything feels like a contrivance in order to set up the perfect situation for this, that, or the other group. This is very much the opposite, where there's a deliberateness to showing the failures and inadequacies of every person on screen, and a level of self-awareness and self-reflection that is important towards humanizing these characters. I think more often than not, especially for this era, both comedy films and romantic rom-com and romance films are not ever self-reflective enough or self-aware enough for the level of writing that they have. They are overly earnest and inconsiderate of reality, the realities of any relationship of any kind. And I think the sort of over-the-topness, saccharine nature of something like Love Actually is very much countered by something like this. Now, that's not to say that this is unsatisfying, or that it doesn't have people to root for and narratives that are really enjoyable to watch. But at the same time, it takes a fairly even-handed tone to the whole thing, and acknowledges, like I said, the characters themselves acknowledge their failures and needs to each other, their dysfunctions, and while their portrayals are not super nuanced, the exchanges that they have are very earnest feeling. And to come back to talking about the script, I think that is the place where the script does the most heavy lifting to make me believe the relationships between these characters and genuinely impress me in some cases with the acting chops of some of the actors on screen. I'm not going to go through the entire list. I've talked about a bunch of these actors before in cases of other movies. But there are a few people on this list who I thought were a bit of the typical I only play myself as a character person, and through a combination of good scripting and reasonable direction, actually brought out some surprisingly dynamic performances even in scenes that are very static, where it's just two characters talking to each other. In keeping with that same vein of the realism of the relationships and the characters, the movie's not afraid to how do I say this? Let's just say that in a spoiler-free way, the end of the film is not afraid. The whole film in general, and especially the end of the film, is not afraid to leave things unfulfilled, which I see to be one of the great failures of romantic comedies and comedy films out of Hollywood in general, is that everything has to be tied up in a neat little bow at the end. Otherwise, it's treated as unsatisfying. This is not a movie that's afraid of doing that. In fact, it openly acknowledges failures right up until the end, places where characters have not made the personal growth that they should have, or that in another movie they would have over the course of a very short period of time. These are often arcs that are just in their beginnings, which is, I cannot understand why somebody might see that as unsatisfying, but to me is really a much more realistic view of, a situation when the whole movie is about a situation that a bunch of characters are in, sometimes that they don't want to be in and are uncomfortable with, and are being confronted with things that they don't want to think about. The idea that they'd, by the end of a short period of time, by the end of the film, suddenly have a conclusive view and change of behavior by that short period of time is ultimately unrealistic. The worst of the worst is the very typical romantic comedy structure of meet, grow, have a fight, reconvene, live happily ever after, like nothing can ever go wrong. This movie is very much not that, and it very willingly acknowledges, oh, this might go bad again, or these characters might continue to fail or not learn from this experience, or drop the ball a bunch more times and make things worse in their life. And I really appreciate that a lot. Now, I will say for some of the other elements, this is not a super well produced film. It's by far not like high quality cinema or something like that, but it has some of those other hallmarks of the sort of era and genre and the cheapness and mimicry therein. In particular, I think that the soundtrack is very much another one of those on the nose pop song selections interspersed with unremarkable original soundtrack stuff. And the thing that actually set me off at the very beginning of the film into starting the thought of, oh, this is just a rom-com, is that the shooting style is extreme throughout the whole film, is extremely 2010s rom-com or 2010s comedy film. It is very flat lighting. It is a lot of sort of well-lit interior shots. It is framing that is only ever considered if it's being used for a specific comedy effect, usually like a prop effect of some kind. Those sorts of things. So it's not really wowing me in a lot of other ways. But between the writing being quite good, the character performances often being compelling, even if they're not super fleshed out, and an overall arc that is both satisfying and curious in its differences to your typical fare. I think this has something to it that is going to make it end up on my list of let's come back to this and see if I feel the same way sometime later. This could end up on my short list of romantic comedy or romantic comedy adjacent films that I actually do like, which I shouldn't say is that short a list, but it's like, it's usually they're few and far between for how many rom-coms there are out there. I did sort of hope this would also spend more time lingering on the element of the funeral. There are a couple of different films I actually really like that are dark comedy or black comedy, such as like Death at a Funeral. And yes, I know there's like 4 of those. I'm gonna let you decide based on what you know of my cinematic views, which one of those I actually like, because most of them aren't good. One of them is good. I was sort of hoping for something in that vein, and at the same time kind of hoping not, because if you're just trying to remake Death at a Funeral, as the remakes have shown, or ape its style, it's probably going to end up going sour. So I'm sort of glad it didn't, but I also feel like it was an underused element in the plot. Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on these characters that are not particularly deep, but are written very well and have some very substantial and genuine moments of emotional response that is far more believable than the typical scripted responses in films of this ilk. It's just kind of interesting. Huh. Yeah, if this is the kind of thing stylistically that is up your alley, or you aren't completely intolerant to, then I would definitely say check it out. It's not particularly long, barely an hour and a half, and it actually feels longer than that, but in a good way, in the capacity of feeling like it has a lot to say, and is doing its best to pace through that at a reasonable pace, which it does. It moves at a pretty good clip, without losing you too much. Anyway, yeah, that's about all I have to say about this. I think I could delve more into the production behind it, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.